I'm here talking with Mary McAlister from the Child and Parent Human Rights Campaign. Do I have that right? The Child and Parent Campaign Rights?
Child and Parental Rights Campaign.
Okay. And I invited Mary here to talk about some of the Obama era policies that have had a huge impact on the transgender movement. And before we got started with those questions, Mary, if you'll just humor me for a second, I wanted to just
Sure.
hold this up because a lot of people are going to assume that, I'm a radical, right, conservative, and I just wanted to show this as an invitation that I got to the Obama inauguration because I was such a strong supporter of his. I donated to his campaign, I canvassed for him, I volunteered. I was an active member in his campaign and a strong supporter of Obama. I have so much paraphernalia here. It's just, I even have this card here that you open up and so for those who watch this, I just wanted to preface it because all too often people are dismissed if they are criticizing a candidate that somebody likes, and they're sort of told that they're, well, they're just that side, or they're just that side. And so I just wanted to note that I was a very strong supporter of Obama, and I have been heartbroken as I have realized the impact of the policies. So Mary, can you just talk a little bit about the Affordable Care Act and the Dear Colleague letter and how those have impacted the trans movement and really empowered this ideology?
Well, sure, Erin, and thank you for having me on. I'm happy to do this. Probably the greatest effect has been felt from the Dear Colleague letter, and that was a letter that was put out by the Obama administration's Department of Education and Department of Justice in May of 2016. So it was toward the end of his term. And what that did is it was sent out to all school districts throughout the country. And the administrators there in those two offices had decided they had not been successful in getting gender identity, transgenderism added into the law, the Title IX law. And of course, Title IX is the federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in schools. And schools who violate that law can lose their federal funding, and they can also be subject to lawsuits from members of the public as well as from the government for violating the discrimination, for discriminating on the basis of sex.
So was the Dear Colleague letter the equivalent of an executive order?
Somewhat, only it did not come from the president directly. It came from people who worked in the administration in these cabinet level offices. And it was the equivalent, what they wanted it to be, and they put it out as being, was the equivalent of a regulation, a new regulation governing Title IX. However, they did not go through the processes that need to be gone through in order to have a valid regulation. You need to, anybody who's familiar or ever looked at the Federal Register, usually when you want to enact a new regulation in the federal government, you put it out for public inspection. The public has a chance to comment on it, and then the agency will respond to the comments and make any changes it believes are necessary. And then that's published in the Federal Register, and then it's published in the Code of Federal Regulations. So that is the whole process, and that ensures that the public is aware of these regulations. Well, none of that was done with this Dear Colleague letter. Instead, these people working in those two agencies had decided that they believed that sex under Title IX should include gender identity. Even though Congress had had the chance to make changes, they did not, and they have not as of yet. The Equality Act, which was passed in the House last year, had it, if it would go through the Senate and be signed, it would do that, but it has not been. But nonetheless, they felt that it needed to be redefined that way, and had not had success in having the Congress do it, and the courts had not weighed in on it. So they just put together this letter, and in that letter, they said it is the department's position that sex discrimination under Title IX includes gender identity. And they just put it out there as if it was gospel truth. They put it out there that this is the legal definition that you must abide by now.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's at possible risk of losing federal funding if violated. So there was a punch behind it.
Oh, absolutely. And they were very clear about that. And they went a step further though also, and they were very specific on how they believed the schools must implement their decision. They said you cannot just, if you have a student who says they are transgender, you cannot offer them an accommodation of a gender neutral single sex bathroom. You can't offer any kind of other kind of accommodation for their needs. You must permit them to use the restroom, shower, locker room of the sex that they say they are. And you must do that. And if you do not, then you are in violation of Title IX. You'll lose your federal funding, etc. They also
does this
applied
include
it
sports
to,
as well?
yes.
Okay, so a male who claims to believe he feels like a female under this rule is allowed to participate in sports in the girls' sports.
Correct. And it also applied. They also applied it to accommodations, like if you go on a band trip, for example, or a field trip. If you're a boy but you identify as a girl, you are to be roomed with the girls. And
does it also apply to staff and faculty?
Yes, it does. And it also applied to pronouns and names. The school had to, all the staff and the faculty and everyone had to use preferred pronouns, preferred names. So in
theory, girls could be supervised by a chaperone on overnight trips who's actually a biological female.
Yes.
And they could have biological males sleeping in their housing without them knowing that person is a biological male.
Correct.
And that's one of the issues that, if people aren't familiar with FERPA, I think it is, that FERPA actually protects the privacy of students, and it's being broadly defined to protect transgender students, so that teachers, students, and parents are not allowed to know about a transgender student who is, a male-bodied student who is using restrooms, locker rooms, showers, and overnight facilities with their daughters.
That's correct. They are broadly defining it that way. Now, that's an issue that it's not necessarily that, from our standpoint, that's not a proper definition. It's too broad, but that is what they're doing so that they can then undermine parents and not have to shine a light on what's going on. And so this dear colleague letter, then, that it goes out to everyone, and most of the people who receive this letter aren't going to realize that really it didn't have any legal effect. They really didn't. They didn't follow procedure. They didn't have the authority to redefine Title IX. But most of the superintendents and school boards and people who get this are not going to understand that. And so they obviously received this and realized that they had to follow this or lose federal funding, and or even get sued by a parent or a transgender child who didn't get their way, didn't get what they requested from the school. And so it was a very, it exerted a lot of pressure on schools, because most of the schools get federal money, rely on federal money. And not to mention the fact that if they were subject to some kind of an investigation by the Department of Education, that's obviously going to be something that's going to be detrimental to them in their community. So all of these things exerted pressure. So what happened then is, of course, a lot of schools obviously reenacted their policies, revised their policies, or enacted policies along these lines. Now, in some cases, there were school districts that were predisposed to doing this anyway. They had already done it, or they were just waiting for the opportunity to do it. So this was their hook. They could say, okay, now we have to do this because the federal agencies are saying we have to do it. So they did it. But the other districts, would have to say the same thing. They say, well, our understanding is federal government says we have to do this, so we have to do this, and we do it. And so any school districts that did not do that, then they risked being brought into some kind of a Title IX investigation or even a lawsuit from a student. So they could do that, but that's the risk they ran. And there was some other instances where school superintendents went ahead and made the change and didn't involve the community, because again, they were told you do this or else. And then the community got up in arms about it, the parents, and the school board decided to rescind that new policy. And of course, then that superintendent ends up being terminated because he went against the will of the people. But yet he was in a catch-20, put them in a catch-22 from their standpoint as to what they could do about it. Now, fortunately, what happened is shortly after it was enacted, there was a group of states. It was about a dozen states, Texas and many others, and some school districts and some governors who filed a lawsuit against the Obama administration, saying that this Dear Colleague letter was invalid because they had not followed the administrative procedure, and invalid because it violated the Constitution and did not represent what Title IX stood for. And that was brought in a northern Texas federal district court. And they asked for the judge to order an injunction, what's called an injunction, which is a court order saying you cannot enforce this law. You cannot put it into practice because it's unconstitutional, or in a preliminary injunction, which is what they sought first, is the court looks at the evidence just preliminarily and says, based on this, I think they have a good chance of proving that this is an unconstitutional law, and therefore I'm going to put an order in effect. Well, that's what this judge did, is he had them come in, and the different states came in with their evidence, the Obama administration came in with theirs, and then the district court judge said, my review of the evidence tells me that I believe that the states are going to be able to prove that this guidance letter is invalid. Therefore, I'm issuing an order saying that it cannot be enforced. And what he did is he made the order effective nationwide,
Oh.
not just for the people that were before him and there in court. And federal judges can do that. Usually they don't. Usually they limit their decision to the parties who are asking for the relief. But when it's something like this that has such a profound effect on the entire country, the federal courts can issue a nationwide injunction, and that's what he did. And that happened in August of 2016. So that as of August of 2016, the law was no longer, it wasn't a law, the guidance letter could not be enforced. So it was no longer a threat to schools, school
And
districts.
did school districts, did administrations understand the injunction? Because it seems like first they get this Dear Colleagues letter that's probably confusing, and then there's this injunction that's probably confusing, and then they probably have activists who are putting pressure on them. So
Yes.
do you feel like the school administrators had a good understanding of where they stood legally?
It was probably some that did, and then others that did not. A court order from a judge is probably something that most administrators would understand, as a part of the law. But again, there would be the school districts and the administrators who want to advocate for the transgender children getting full access, and so they probably would not have been affected from their standpoint and would not have done anything to change their policy. The ones that it was probably most beneficial to would have been the administrators and school districts who were not in favor of having to make these drastic changes, who wanted to maintain their sex-separate facilities based on biological sex, and then to just make accommodations for children or staff members who would come to them, and then make available to them single-use facilities or other accommodations. And so for those districts, this was something that was very beneficial to them, that they then understood, okay, the judge has said that you can't enforce this against us, so we are not going to be pressured to make these drastic changes. So some would have done that.
And just to
did.
clarify, we talk about the school districts, but if I'm not mistaken, this also applied to higher education, to public higher education institutions.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So colleges. So sporting events and scholarships that are sex-based.
Yes.
So that has a huge impact on young women going to college.
Yes.
If their scholarships can then be offered to men who claim to identify as females.
Right, which is of course happening right now. But the injunction against the Dear Colleague letter would have meant that was no longer something that was hanging over the college's head or the high school's head, of them having to agree with these demands. And then, of course, in February of 2017, the Trump administration rescinded.
Mm-hmm. So it never went through the full legal review because Trump rescinded it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Because the judge in Texas had issued this preliminary nationwide injunction saying that until the case is decided, this letter cannot be enforced against anyone. The Obama administration had appealed that. They were going to appeal it. But then after the election, when the Trump administration came in, they dropped the appeal and they rescinded the letter, and therefore the case was dismissed because it was no longer necessary.
So the the Biden campaign has said that transgender issues are their #1 human rights issue if they're elected, which gives me the impression that they will probably try to reenact this this regulation. If that is the case, will it still be under the injunction?
No, No, because
It would be a
that
different.
letter was rescinded. It would be different. And I would suspect what the Biden administration would try to do, he might issue an executive order early on, but I think what he would try to do is if the Senate were to flip, then they would just get the Equality Act on the books and that would take care of it.
So for those
But
who don't
that,
know about the Equality Act, do you feel comfortable kind of describing what that is and the implications that it would have?
yeah, in general, fairly general terms, but the Equality Act would basically do what they've wanted to do, what the activists have wanted to do for many years with Title IX, Title VII, all of the discrimination laws in effect. They would expand the definition of sex to mean not only male and female, but gender identity, and they would also include discrimination against lesbians, homosexuals, though any of those who have
Although on some level,
these.
lesbians and homosexuals as a classification goes away if a male can identify as a lesbian and a woman can identify as a gay man. So as this Equality Act is seeking, it claims to protect gays and women, it actually erases them as categories, because anybody can kind of opt in to a category based on self-identification.
That's correct. That's correct. By including the transgender and the gender identity in that's very much what happens. And which is a question as to why all of those are included together, but that's how it's worded. And also the Equality Act has no religious exemption to it. It affects
So in
employment.
essence, if a man identified as a woman and wanted to join a nunnery would not be able to reject him based on his biological sex. Is that?
That's my understanding of the way the Equality Act was written as it was passed through the House last year. There are existing religious accommodation laws on the books that theoretically should still apply.
But it's hard to know, if Biden is in office and this is his agenda, he can do a lot with executive orders. Can you explain sort of the reach of an executive order if he decided to come out with something equivalent to the Dear Colleague letter with an executive order? Would that have to be litigated, or would that stand as an executive order?
Well, it would have to be litigated, and it probably would be. But if he issues the executive order and it's not challenged, then
Right.
It's for all intents and purposes treated as a law. But if it is challenged, then of course it can be subject to a court saying he overstepped his authority, or thinning it down somewhat in what it covers. And so a lot would depend on what the courts did with it at that point. But he could, and we know some of the executive orders that President Trump has put in place, and what those have been able to do. And so he could do, it could be, go ahead.
Oh, one of the things that occurs to me, and I'm thinking that your colleague Bernadette Broyles might have mentioned this to me, is that in essence, this the Dear Colleagues letter, and even notwithstanding that, but any school districts that accept someone who identifies as transgender as the equivalent of the sex they identify with, that there are now cases where arguably you could file a Title IX complaint, because now biological males are being treated, well, biological females have lost their protections, that those are negated if somebody can self-ID into that category.
Right.
So are there cases now where Title IX is being used in order to challenge the idea of self-identification?
They're not to any great extent. I mean, most of the cases, at least that we've dealt with, have been where the schools have tried to, well, like there's a case in Connecticut where with the sports,
Uh-huh.
where the schools have said the boys have to be able to, who identify as girls, have to be able to compete on the girls' teams, and the girls have filed the lawsuits challenging that and saying no, that destroys the very essence of Title IX, which it does. If you do the whole self-identity and you don't have any objective standards, then
There's
Title IX is almost meaningless
right.
from the standpoint of why it was enacted, because it was enacted to level the playing field academically and sports and everything else for women and girls, because they weren't getting the opportunities that men were. Well, if now anybody can be a woman, then, or girl, then there's not any real ability to have any kind of equal playing field for true women and girls, because as happened in Connecticut, in the Connecticut case, you had these boys who would get on the track team, and of course they could outrun the girls. And so the girls would come in 5th, 6th, 7th place instead of 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, and lose their ability to compete where they could get athletic scholarships, even though they were the fastest in the state as girls. When these boys came in and ran as girls, they were no longer that fast. And of course, the boys would just say, well, just run faster. The biological markers in all of us are either male or female when we're born. I mean,
Well, and that's why
every
Title IX was enacted, is because we recognize that there are these, biological differences that make, that require girls to compete against girls if they want to have a fair chance of winning.
right, exactly.
And it really, to me, I'm just incredibly disturbed about the idea that the Equality Act, if it's passed, would remove these distinctions, and that, I just have this image of, predators, people who, predators who will take advantage of this. And the argument is always that transgender people are not predators, and that to say that they're going to be taking advantage of girls and women in spaces where they're vulnerable is transphobic. But they fail to recognize that when a man can self-ID as a woman, then that really, to me, is an open invitation to predators.
Exactly. And that's one of the main concerns that we have with a lot of the cases that we're dealing with, is that without standards, anybody can be a woman. And so, no, we're not saying that transgender people are themselves predators. We're just saying that if you don't have an objective standard, then, if you're not allowed to question a 6-foot, 4-inch, 300-pound man when he comes to you and says, I identify as a woman, and you can't have any question about that, or you can't require any kind of objective testing, then you can't prevent somebody who just is going to lie. I mean, if they're a sexual predator, they're not going to have problems lying about their identity. That's going to be easy. I mean, just think of teenage boys. How many teenage boys would lie to get in the girls' bathroom or in the girls' showers? I mean,
Well, and just to even intimidate them. I mean, there are bullies, and what a great opportunity this would be for bullies. And then I think about my situation where, I was sexually assaulted as a child and took on a trans identity. And thankfully, I was not affirmed and told that I could use the boys' bathroom, because I think about that now. And here I am, this little girl. If I started going into boys' rooms and men's public bathrooms, I would be really at risk of being potentially sexually assaulted again.
Right, right. And that's another thing that we always bring up, is the fact that there are, unfortunately, so many women and girls like you who have this kind of a history of sexual assault. And so for them, even the presence, if you have a person with a male body who's coming into their private space, that's going to trigger all kinds of trauma for them. But
Yeah, I actually stopped
just
going to Planet Fitness because Planet Fitness decided to enact a policy that men could use the women's bathrooms. And I used to have a membership, and I won't go in there because if a man walks in there and I object, I'm the one who's going to be labeled transphobic.
Right. Right. And with you and other people who have had this experience, it's a reliving of their trauma. If they're in a private, intimate space with somebody with a male body who's a stranger to them,
Yeah, it's really,
and
it's
but that,
sort of
yeah,
will trigger all, and PTSD and all kinds of things. And then for them to be told that they can't even complain about it. I mean, it's like it's re-traumatizing them and then telling them they're at fault for having those feelings. And for little girls, I think, even girls who haven't been sexually assaulted, to be told that they don't have a right to consent to who sees them naked, that's a pretty significant message to send to girls.
right, right. It just really builds up the wrong kind of body image and integrity thought for all of these girls. And I know that's one of the cases we're dealing with out in Oregon that we're hoping the Supreme Court's going to review, that the school put in one of these policies, and for, it was one girl who believed she was a boy, but they made it very clear you could not question it, you could not oppose it, and any of the kids who opposed it were going to be punished.
Oh,
And in fact, there was a group of students who had done a petition drive, and they were on their, during recess and lunch and whatnot, were talking to their fellow students and handing out petitions and saying, we want to petition the district to not do this. The principal came and confiscated the petitions and told them if they did that again, they'd be disciplined.
wow.
So
Wow.
again, they're built in that you can't argue with this. You can't be uncomfortable with the fact that there is a person with the opposite sex body in there with you, because if you complain, you're the problem. And so what kind of message is that for kids?
Yeah, it's just
And
it's
there've been and there've been cases too where the coaches have been, and
oh,
in this case in Oregon, there was a male coach who was assigned to oversee this girl. She saw a female body who felt she was a boy, and he was to be in there. And that has happened too in very many cases, that you have male adults supervising children of the opposite sex because the children self-identify as that sex. And how much, again, predators, and how many instances, unfortunately, have we heard of coaches and teachers and whatnot, people at school assaulting students? Well, now you're just setting that up for them.
yeah, you're providing them
And
an opportunity and a space and tacit approval, really.
right.
And so,
And
Mary, you have provided a lot of insight on the Dear Colleague letter, and I know that the Affordable Care Act isn't your specialty. Do you have enough sort of insights into how that has impacted the trans ideology? Because, again, as someone who did support Obama, and I supported the Affordable Care Act when it was first proposed, I thought it sounded like a great idea that people could get health care they needed. And now I'm hearing that the Affordable Care Act actually opened the floodgates to children accessing puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries, not just children, adults as well, because the Affordable Care Act stipulates that these are medically necessary treatments. Do you have any insights on that?
yes, a few. It's Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, and it was like this Dear Colleague letter, only this actually is the law. It said that you can't discriminate in medical treatments and what is covered under your either Medicare, Medicaid, or insurance on the basis of gender identity. So it did basically open the floodgates, because it basically said now that if you have private insurance or Medicaid or Medicaid or Medicare, then your gender affirming treatments are covered under that. So that is, of course, then a big potential windfall for the pharmaceutical companies, for the doctors and the clinics that do these treatments, because now they will be paid through the insurance companies, Medicare, Medicaid, for these services. And it really incentivizes them to promote these services and to encourage people to undergo them, because they're going to get paid for them.
And these are expensive
Where
treatments.
especially the cross-sex hormones, because those are lifelong. You can never go off of those if you want to maintain the appearance, what you have maintained. That's lifelong. And so, yeah, that's forever. And of course, usually the surgeries, to the extent they go on, those usually have a lot of follow-ups that have to occur and things like that. So yeah, could be a very lucrative thing for these pharmaceutical companies, medical supply companies, doctors, the ones that are not ethically, bound by their own ethics to not do such things.
Well, and it really
And
strikes me as discriminatory on some level, because what this does is it means that a certain group is entitled to cosmetic interventions and another group isn't. And so based on how you identify, you are given special medical interventions, basically. If I wanted to have chest surgery done, it wouldn't cover it for me. But if a male wanted to have it done, who said he identified as a female, then a lot of times that is covered, and it's covered because they're not allowed to discriminate based on gender identity. But in doing so, it seems like they're discriminating based on biological sex.
right, that's a good point. And like you said, if somebody went in, I mean, I know there are people who go in to have mastectomies who don't have breast cancer, but they have the BRCA gene.
Right.
And I'm not sure that those are covered, but
Right.
if they are, they
yeah.
as
That would be
prophylactic.
interesting to find out. And I know there are cases where women need estrogen and progesterone, and sometimes the insurance won't cover it. But if a male
Right.
identifies as a female, then it will be covered. So again, we have another instance where transgender rights seem to be somehow taking precedent over sex-based rights and protections.
Right, exactly. And then of course the children are able to get it in some states. Of course, Oregon, 15 years old, they don't need parent permission or anything. They can just walk into the clinic and get puberty blockers, hormones, and surgery.
It's amazing when you think about something that, in my mind, when I was supporting the Affordable Care Act, here I was thinking this is going to provide important medical treatments to people who can't afford it, and in my naivete, I didn't investigate, and I had no idea that the consequences of this would now be that children are being sterilized. They're being basically induced developmental delays with puberty blockers. We're having, I've heard, I actually heard a recent interview by someone with Kaiser Permanente who said that girls as young as 12 years old are having mastectomies. Boys as young as 15 or 16 are being castrated. These are tremendously invasive, non-reversible interventions being done on children that really are not justifiable. And it's amazing to me that, this is the result of this, the Affordable Care Act. And so on some level, can you sort of help us as Americans, as voters, as people who want to be kind of watchdogs on this? How do we kind of keep our eye open for these kind of policies that sneak their way in and can have such long-term and profound societal impacts?
Well, I think obviously, the ballot box and voting for legislators and president and people who will uphold the rule of law and who will see these kinds of things occurring. And then just being vigilant too about reading what's really in, as Nancy Pelosi said, you have to read it after we pass it. Well, no, we have to insist on reading and understanding what is in these laws when they're written before they're passed. And in just realizing that, and actually one of the big things is to really question about what evidence do they have, what scientific, the other side is always big on science, and the science of this and the science, and science tells us, well, what does the science say about what they're asking to do? They will superficially talk about, oh, well, it's all approved and all of that. But really, scientifically, they don't have any evidence. And what they do point to is they'll point to organizations like the American Medical Association, the American Association of Pediatricians, the American Psychological Association. But these are professional organizations. And like many professional organizations, such as the teachers' unions, they have been co-opted in a lot of cases by, progressive radicals who are pushing these things. And so these associations, they may have 50,000 doctors as members, quote unquote, but the policies are put together by maybe one, two, or a group of people, voted on by a committee of a handful of people. Then that's the official policy of the American Medical Association. Mm-hmm. So then the activists will point to that. Well, the American Medical Association says it's okay. So that's what they use. But you have to dig deeper. You have to ask about, peer-reviewed studies. What are the studies? Have you done any long-term, scientific method? Go back to the scientific method. Have you followed the scientific method? Have you
and those that have been done have showed that these medical interventions are incredibly dangerous. And common sense shows that allowing anybody who wants to claim to believe they feel like a woman into spaces where women are vulnerable is going to cause problems. I mean, these are, we've got scientific foundation for concerns about medical transitioning, but we've got our common sense to know that predators are going to take advantage of these. So as we near the end of this, I want to emphasize to anybody listening how important it is that the Equality Act doesn't pass, because if it passes, then this is law now, that girls and women basically will lose all their sex-based rights and protections, as will gays and lesbians. So this is going to have a profound effect on policy. And we've talked about some things. Are there any other areas where the Equality Act would impact that we haven't talked about?
Oh, I mean, I think the impact is just enormous. It's going to affect virtually every aspect of life. Your work life, your school life, your private life, like you say, going to the health club, social gatherings, and all of that kind of thing. And it's going to be just, and because when you look at the Equality Act, the list of laws that it will affect is enormous, because it's basically any law that sets forth any kind of standard based upon sex or a similar status will now be revised to include the gender identity. So you have, any of your laws that have any kind of differentiation like that are going to be affected. So
I just am thinking of, like, if I'm at the gynecologist and request, a female nurse to come in, a man could walk in and there's nothing I could do about it.
Correct. Right. There would be nothing, because if that man identifies as a woman, yes.
So that would basically codify this rhetoric that a trans woman is a woman. This would legally make that true.
Yes. And you think too, not only, I mean, not only Title IX, which are obviously important, but just think of all of the other rights that the feminist movement, you know, back to 100 years ago with the women's vote, all of the things that they fought so hard for would be erased, be gone.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, one of the big fights I remember was for female firefighters to be able to have their own locker rooms and showers. And they finally won that, and that would be taken away, basically.
Right. It would be. And we've already seen some of that, like things like the domestic violence shelters. Or some of the
Can you talk
domestic
about
violence
that
shelters
for
are,
people who aren't familiar with what's happening there?
well, part of what in some of the states and localities that have taken a particularly strong stance in favor of the transgender rights, where they have said, if you identify as that sex, that's what you are, and you're to be treated that way. There have been instances where you have domestic violence shelters, women's shelters for women and children who are victims of domestic violence. And they have been told that they have to open those up, permit a person in a male body who identifies as female, who claims that they have been the victim of domestic violence, to come in there. What you have in there women and children who have probably been beaten and or sexually assaulted by a man, and the reason why they're there is to escape that, and now you're putting a man in there with them.
And that would
that's
be
the
true
kind of
with
thing.
prisons as well, prisons and homeless shelters.
Yeah.
I know I was shocked. I called my local homeless shelter to find out what their policy is. And their policy is to put anybody who identifies as a female in with women. And so even without the Equality Act, this is happening in a lot of places, but the Equality Act would give it legal backing.
Right. And so you wouldn't be able to sue and have it overturned, because that's what the law says.
It really, as we're talking about this, Mary, I just feel like this is insane. I mean, I don't even know how to put it, but it's surreal.
Yeah.
It just is. It's so outrageous to me that we've gotten to the point where male feelings are overriding women's rights and protections, and that some, in general, feelings are overriding reality.
Right. Exactly. It's like you said, surreal. It defies science. I mean, these are people who say they're grounded in science, and they go after people who have a faith basis to say, well, that's fantasy, that has nothing to do with anything, we're science-based. Well, if that's true, where's the science saying there's any more than two sexes?
Yeah, it's confounding. So is there anything that we didn't talk about that you feel like it's important for our viewers to know about?
Not specifically, but like we were talking about earlier, just be very discerning when you're shown these policies and these laws, and ask the tough questions. I mean, you're going to be shouted down, you're going to be called names, etc. But are your children and siblings and spouses worth that, their safety? And to be the voice for common sense and privacy and safety,
and protecting
don't let
children from these interventions that are just horrific. I mean, when I think about what's happening to children, it's unconscionable that this is happening in the US. And it's like when they were giving lobotomies to people.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just, we're going to look back on this and just shake our heads and wonder how we ever allowed something so horrific to happen.
Well, and there was a Supreme Court case years ago, and unfortunately Virginia, where I'm at, was the locus of it, where the law provided they could sterilize what they called unfit people.
And that's basically what's happening.
We're sterilizing children. But if you tried to sterilize unfit people today, you'd be getting this outcry. Well, now you're sterilizing children and there's no outcry.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's really I'm so thankful for your efforts and the efforts of your organization, and I hope that I'll put a link to your organization if that's okay. I suspect that
absolutely.
you could use
Mhm.
donations for the good work that
Yeah.
you're doing, and I would encourage
Yes.
people to donate because I know that you are sort of one of the few groups that's really taking this on and championing the rights of especially girls who
Yeah.
are being victimized as a result of these policies.
Right. Very much so. That's what our calling is to parents and children's rights, to restore parental rights and protect children from the dangers and harms that they're being subjected to by this ideology.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It's humbling and it's aggravating and astounding that we're talking about these
Mhm.
things. But I think people need to know, and I think it's especially important for people like me who, I formerly would have identified as a leftist a couple of years ago until I've sort of seen what's happening, and I'm mortified. And I think that more people need to understand what's going on instead of just sort of mindlessly accepting the policies of the party or the candidates that they have supported. So thank you.
Exactly.